My name is Dwight Hutchison, and I am the author of several books and articles about the Star of Bethlehem. And this is the 10th video in a series of videos about the star. And in this video, we're going to be specifically talking about the incident at Bethlehem. Now, to begin the video, we're going to just have a brief visit of Bethlehem as it is. One can go to Bethlehem from Jerusalem even these days. It's about 5 miles or maybe 8 kilometers to get down there from Jerusalem, and one goes out the western side of the city of Jerusalem, just as one would have done years ago, because there's a deep valley over to the south and part of the southwest of the city. And so people would not have come out of the southern side of the city specifically. They would have come out of the western side, followed a small valley there, and then gone up onto a plateau that goes for several miles. And then one arrives at a spot where one can see the town of Bethlehem in the distance, and then the road kind of falls away, the elevation falls away, and then it rises again at Bethlehem itself. And this is exactly what the wise men would have seen if they, when they were traveling there from Jerusalem. And I think that they were traveling from Jerusalem. There have been a few Christian people who have speculated that they traveled maybe from the Herodium, which is a place just outside of Bethlehem, where that Herod had a fortress palace. And we'll even take a few shots from there in these next moments, and that way you can see that. And you can see the view back from the Herodium toward Bethlehem. But I think myself that the men visited with Herod when they were in Jerusalem, and then they left the city and went to Bethlehem. Now, the city sits on a small hill, and one can really see the depths of the valleys around the town. As you look in these photos, you can see how many stories there are of some of the buildings that are down in the valley, and one just arrives at the same level 7 or 8 stories later as you look at these photos. And then there are tall buildings as well, and churches on the ridges around Bethlehem and in the city itself. The city has plenty of tourist shops. There's plenty of places to buy souvenirs. There are a good number of churches, as I've just indicated, and there are narrow streets, and there would have been narrow streets at the time when Jesus was born. And I do think he was born here. It says that he would come out of a town named Bethlehem Ephrata, which is this Bethlehem south of Jerusalem. Some people have pointed out that there's another Bethlehem in the north, but it's Bethlehem Ephrata was the place that David was from. Jesus is from the lineage of David, and so the important place is Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, Bethlehem Ephrata. And here are also some photos of the supposed shepherd's field. And again, the shepherds were present just moments after the birth of Jesus, or a very short period of time after the birth of Jesus. And here are some photos of the supposed shepherd's field, where traditionally the angel spoke to them and then there was a multitude of the heavenly host singing praises to God and speaking of glory to God in the highest, and talking about the peace that God wants toward men. and it's only through Jesus that we have that peace with God, and that we're able to be in communion with Him. And this is really a good news thing, that we can have God's favor, and that God would be really looking out for the best thing for us through the work of Jesus, because Jesus has died, He's been raised from the dead. Now, the title that I gave to this particular video may have attracted your attention. I spoke of the incident at Bethlehem. Well, if you consider the entire story concerning the wise men and the star, the time at Bethlehem is kind of like an incident. It's not the heart of the story, actually, because the heart of the story is the message that the men received while they were in the East. The time in Bethlehem is kind of like the cherry on the cake. It's not the cake, it's not the icing, but it might be a cherry. And I think that this is clear because the men would not have made an enormous long trip with some danger and a lot of financial expense, unless that something very significant had happened in the East. And as we looked at in earlier videos, the men were thoroughly convinced, because there were a whole lot of things happening in the East concerning the star that would have convinced them that a great king had been born. And as we've looked at this thing, we've seen that the name of the star in Hebrew is Sedek, which means righteousness. The Messiah was the righteous one, or is the righteous one. He's raised from the dead, and He is living today. So it's obvious that the men received a significant message while they were in the East, and then they ended up in Judea. And I don't think that they were actually expecting any other messages, because the message that they had received was the main message, that a great king had been born and had come into the world. And so it's really necessary to kind of recalibrate our thinking about the Star of Bethlehem. The incident at Bethlehem is just exactly that. It is the ice is not the icing on the cake. It may be a cherry. So, or you could say maybe the icing on the cake, but there's a real cake. The message is there. Anyway, as we shall see, the event that I'm proposing as the incident at Bethlehem is actually not all that spectacular, but in the timing of things and in the context of the greater story, the message that they received in the East, it would have been absolutely spectacular for them. The thing depends on timing. And when did they arrive in Bethlehem, and when did they see the star again? Now, if you'll notice the text, it says that the star went on before them, and we've explained that the star preceded them and was waiting for them when they arrived in Bethlehem itself. The star was not a guide on the way to Bethlehem, but it did precede them. It was waiting for them. And so when they arrived there, they saw the star in a new context with a new symbolic significance. And there they said, "Oh." and we have pointed out that Jesus was probably born about a year before the wise men arrived in Bethlehem. The wise men did not arrive in Bethlehem at Jesus' birth. It was sometime after Jesus' birth, and we've talked about this. This is indicated in the text itself. Jesus was already born when the wise men arrived in Jerusalem. They arrived saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" or "Who is born King of the Jews?" And so in their mind, he was already born. He was not a child that was going to be born, but he was a child that had been born already. And almost directly after Jesus had been visited by the wise men in Bethlehem, his family, Mary and Joseph and the young child Jesus, left Bethlehem and went to Egypt. They fled to Egypt because they were warned in a dream that they must go there to escape Herod, who would seek to murder the child. Now, concerning the incident at Bethlehem, when the wise men see the star, at Bethlehem, we have already established that the star would have been visible at night, as stars normally are, and it was above the town and above the whole region there for a large part of the night, very high up in the sky. So it would have been well above the heads of the wise men as they were looking up at the star. It would not have been out toward the horizon somewhere, but it would have been way above their heads. And if you've followed some of the other videos in this series, you'll know that the star rose in the east at the end of August of 2 BC. And then it rose higher and higher each month over the next 4 months. And at the end of December in 2 BC is the time that I think that the wise men would have visited Bethlehem. They would have seen the star in the early part of the morning, how should I say this, the last part of the night, before dawn, and in the many hours preceding dawn. And they would have seen the star quite high in the heavens. And the star, 4 months after it had risen, would have been at the stationary point in the cycle of the star, which we've established is the planet Jupiter. And it looks like a star, and you can go out and look at the planet even now. I'm recording this video in June. And the star is well up in the sky right now, and soon it will come to its stationary point where that it does not look like it's moving among the background stars. So, and this also fits into the timing of things, because in January of 1 BC, there was a total eclipse of the moon that took place and was very visible in Judea. This eclipse took place, and it's recorded by Josephus, and I'll give you the reference for that on the screen. And then not too long after that, Herod died. And so the death, the funeral, all of that could have happened. And then Archelaus, his son, would have become the king. His role had to be approved of by the emperor. And so he actually made a trip to Rome following the death of his father. But before he made the trip to Rome, he was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival. Some good scholars have done some work on this. And so the thing is that at the end of December of 2 BC, the star Jupiter, Sedek MUL.BABBAR, was at its stationary point in the heavens, and it would have been visible for a good part of the night. The later part of the night before dawn, it would have been quite visible in the heavens above Bethlehem. And it would have been well above the Magi's heads. It wouldn't have been out there somewhere toward the horizon. It would have been well over the place where the child was, and that's what is written in the text. So I think that they were kind of taken by surprise by this, because they ended up there just at the right moment, when the planet was at the stationary point, and seeing how that the planet had been involved in many royal signs exactly at the various points of its planetary cycle. This would have not been, this would have been a surprise to have been in town there in Bethlehem when this stationary point took place. And they calculated these things in advance, so they would have probably even had a cuneiform tablet with them that would indicate things about the planetary cycle. It was part of the almanac that they had every year. And so all that they had to do was just look, and they would see the date. Now, they would not have been out measuring how far the star was in relation to other stars, etc., because that was not how that they measured the planetary cycle and the stationary point. It took place 4 months after the heliacal rising, after the star rose in the east. Basically just 4 months later, there is the stationary point. And so all that they had to do was look at the almanac. They wouldn't have to measure anything. And actually, for a period of about 2 weeks, you can't really see much movement by the star itself anyway, by the planet, because the movements are so small that it takes well over a week for things to become clear, and that there is again movement. Yeah, and so here they arrive in Bethlehem. The star is there waiting for them. It had preceded them there, and it was stationary at that point in the skies among the background stars. And they said, wow, this is just similar to what we experienced in the east. Here the king star is stopped, the king planet that is stopped during its cycle, and among the background stars, and this must be significant. And so they rejoiced, thinking, this child, this baby king must be really here in this town, and we are going to find him. And that's exactly what they did. And by one means or another, they were able to find the child. And I think I've already spoken about this in another video. There weren't all that many people living in town, certainly probably less than 1,000 people. And among them, there may have been no more than 20 or 30 small children born in the previous 2 years. The rabbis would have known who those children were, especially the male boys were circumcised. And so all that the men had to do was ask around a little bit, ask a rabbi. They would know who the young boys were. They'd be able to identify them. And any rabbi might be interested in the mission of these wise men. And so when they would hear about this, I'm sure that they were quite interested. And I think that they arranged meetings with the families. And of course, Jesus' parents knew exactly who he was. And I guess things became evident as discussions took place, and they knew that they had found the Messiah. And again, as I've also maybe mentioned in a previous video, there were other witnesses around. There were people in town that knew that the Messiah had been born there in Bethlehem. The shepherds, and then the shepherds had talked to people. And so one way or the other, in a small town where there's maybe 10, 15 young boys less than 2 years of age that had just been born in the previous 2 years, you can imagine that it was not that hard to find the family. And then after they had found the child, they gave him the gifts, they bowed down to him, and they fled by a different way. As it's written in the text, they were warned in a dream, and we don't know exactly when that they received the dream. It's possible that they received the dream even before that they met the young Messiah. It's not clear in the text. But maybe after meeting him, they received the dream, or before. But they knew that after that they met the child, that they had to leave by a different way. And so they went a different direction. They did not return to Herod. The dream was clear about that. And then Jesus and his parents fled to Egypt within a day or so of the visit of the wise men. Or at least it would appear it was a day or so. It may have been a few days after that. But very quickly they left and they went to Egypt, and they stayed there until Joseph had a dream to return to Israel. And if you notice in the text, it actually says that he was afraid to go to Bethlehem because Archelaus, Herod's son, was reigning in Jerusalem. And if you think about this, that means that he would have liked to have returned to Bethlehem, because the family had probably been living there for an extended period of time after the birth of Jesus, as I've indicated. So the wow star in Bethlehem is probably just Jupiter at his stationary point, but at a coincidental date when the men were there in town. Now, I am going to do another video in which we will look at some curious things from the book of Daniel that are related to the star and to the birth and the death and resurrection of Jesus. And we'll be looking at that in the next video in the series. And that will be the final one, video number 11.